Pam Bondi walked into that hearing room prepared for a fight. She had done this before. She knew how congressional hearings worked. She knew how to handle hostile questions, how to deflect without appearing to deflect, how to run out the clock on a line of inquiry without ever actually answering the question at its center. She had her talking points. She had her legal training. She had years of experience standing in front of cameras and saying exactly as much as she wanted to say, and not one word more. She had served as Attorney General of Florida. She had appeared on national television hundreds of times. She understood, at a deep and practiced level, how institutional language works, how to deploy it, how to hide behind it, and how to use it to make a non-answer sound like a substantive response to anyone not paying close enough attention. What she did not have was an answer for Jasmine Crockett. The hearing had been contentious from the start. The Epstein files, the documents, the client lists, the records that powerful people on both sides of Washington had spent years insisting either didn't exist or didn't matter, had become impossible to ignore. Too many questions, too many inconsistencies, too many moments where the official explanation fell apart. The moment someone looked at it carefully, and Crockett had looked at it very carefully, she had been preparing for this exchange for weeks. Not preparing in the way that politicians often prepare for hearings, assembling a list of sharp-sounding questions designed to generate a clip, but preparing in the way that a former public defender prepares for cross-examination. Methodically, precisely, document by document, source by source, building a case that didn't need theater because the facts were doing the work on their own. Because when the documents say what these documents said, you don't need to perform, you just need to read. When her time came, the room was already tense. Other members had taken their shots at Bondi throughout the morning. Some had been aggressive, some had been pointed. Bondi had absorbed all of it with the practiced composure of someone who had sat through difficult hearings before and understood that the key was to outlast the questioner, not answer them. But Crockett didn't open the way the others had. She didn't start with outrage. She didn't lead with a dramatic statement about the American people deserving the truth. She didn't reference the victims or invoke the weight of the moment. She opened with a date, not an argument, not a framing, not a statement about what this hearing meant or what the American people deserved. One specific date, one specific document, one specific decision, made inside the Department of Justice that she wanted Pam Bondi to explain on the record and then be held to. Bondi's first answer was smooth, fluent. It acknowledged the date and offered a general characterization of the department's position on the Epstein files that managed to sound substantive without committing to anything specific. It was a very good no-nonsense. Crockett let it land. She wrote something down. Then she looked up, and she asked about the next document. This is where the dynamic in the room began to shift, because Crockett wasn't asking questions to generate outrage. She was asking questions to build a timeline, a documented, verifiable, source-by-source timeline of decisions made inside the Justice Department regarding the Epstein files, decisions about what to release, what to withhold, what to classify, and who made those calls and when. And with every question she asked, it became clearer that she had the receipts for every answer she was going to accept and every answer she was going to reject. Bondi felt it. You could see it in the way her responses began to shift. Still composed, still controlled, but slightly more careful, slightly more hedged. The answers getting a little longer, a little more technical, reaching a little further for language that could cover more ground. That's what happens when a witness starts to realize that the person asking the questions already knows what the answers should be, and that the questions are not designed to discover information. They are designed to establish, on the permanent public record, the exact distance between what the witness is willing to say under oath and what the documents actually show. By the fifth question, the room had gone quiet in a way it hadn't been all morning. The procedural quiet of a hearing running its course. Something more focused than that. The kind of attention that fills a space when everyone understands simultaneously that something real is happening, that this particular exchange is not going to resolve the way the others did. Crockett placed a document on the desk in front of her. She didn't announce it. She didn't make a speech about what it represented or why it mattered. She read a single paragraph from it. That paragraph described a specific internal decision made at the senior level of the Justice Department. It described the reasoning behind that decision as it was recorded internally at the time, and it described the outcome of that decision in terms that were specific enough, specific in dates, in names, in institutional language, that there was very little room to argue about what it said. What it said was that the characterization Bondi had just offered to the committee was not consistent with what the department's own records showed had happened. The silence after Crockett finished reading lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. Bondi's response was careful, professionally constructed. She questioned whether the document Crockett was reading from captured the full context of the decision. She suggested that internal records often reflect preliminary thinking rather than final determinations. She indicated that she would need to review the specific document before commenting on its accuracy. These are standard answers. Experienced, defensible, but Crockett had anticipated all three of them. She turned to the next page of the file. I have the final determination here, she said. Would you like me to read that as well? That was the moment. Not a dramatic moment in the way that hearing moments are sometimes constructed. No raised voice. No pounding on the table. No declaration designed for the evening news. Just a woman with a file full of documents, asking a former attorney general if she wanted to hear what her own department had actually decided. Bondi said she would need more time to review the materials. Crockett said she understood. Then she read the final determination anyway. To understand why the Epstein files occupy the position they do in the American political consciousness, you have to understand what they represent beyond the case itself. Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of sex crimes involving minors. He had documented connections to some of the most powerful figures in American public life: politicians, financiers, academics, royalty. He died in federal custody under circumstances that generated immediate and widespread skepticism about the official account of his death. And then there are the files, the documents, the flight logs, the communications, the financial records, the client lists, the paper trail of a man who operated at the intersection of enormous power and documented criminal behavior for decades. Some of those documents have been released. Many have not. The decisions about what to release and what to withhold have been made inside institutions whose leadership has, in some cases, had their own connections to the networks Epstein operated within. That is the context in which Jasmine Crockett was asking her questions. Not as a political exercise, not as an opportunity to generate attention for herself or damage a political opponent, but as a member of the United States Congress who had read the files, understood what they contained, and was not willing to sit in a hearing room and accept a polished known answer as a substitute for the truth. Not as a political exercise, not as an opportunity to generate attention or score points against an opponent, not as a member of the United States Congress exercising the constitutional oversight authority of the legislative branch over an executive department that has made specific decisions about specific documents that the American public has a legitimate and urgent interest in understanding. That's the job. And the job? It requires doing something that is actually quite simple in theory and extraordinarily difficult in practice. It requires knowing more about the documents than the witness does, or at the very least, knowing enough about the documents that the witness cannot successfully obscure what they contain. Crockett had done that work. The file she had brought into that hearing room wasn't assembled from news reports or political opposition research. It had been built from official records, filings, internal communications, departmental and institutional decisions that had been made by people who assumed they would never need to defend them publicly. That assumption turned out to be wrong. It was the kind of documentation that takes months to gather, months to understand, months to organize into a sequence that holds together under pressure and tells a coherent story that a witness cannot pick apart with appeals to context or claims of incomplete information. Crockett had done that work. Every page of it, and the story it told, was not the story Pam Bondi had been telling the committee all morning. There is a specific moment in every high-stakes congressional exchange when the person being questioned stops trying to win and starts trying to survive. It is rarely dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small things. A phrase slightly more hedged than the one before it. An answer that runs a few seconds longer than it needs to. A pause before responding that wasn't there 20 minutes ago. By the time Crockett reached the final section of her questions, Bondi's composure was intact, but her answers had changed character entirely. The fluent, substantive-sounding non-answers of the early rounds had given way to something shorter and more careful, more qualified, more reliant on phrases like, "to the best of my recollection," and I would want to confirm that before stating it on the record. These are the phrases of a witness who has stopped trying to win the exchange and started trying to survive it without making a statement that can be directly contradicted by a document. Sitting on the desk 6 feet away, Crockett didn't press for a dramatic confession. She didn't demand that Bondi admit anything specific. She did something more effective. She read the last document into the congressional record, slowly, carefully, every line given exactly the weight it deserved and not a word of commentary added around it. Just the language of the document itself, placed into the permanent record of a United States congressional hearing, where it will remain regardless of what any press release or official statement says afterward, clearly, completely, without editorializing or interpretation. She let the document speak entirely for itself, and then she yielded her time. No summary, no closing statement, no final declaration about what the American people deserved or what history would record. She had done the work. The record would reflect it. That was enough. What happened in that hearing room matters for reasons that extend far beyond the immediate political moment. The Epstein files are not going to resolve themselves. The questions surrounding them, about who knew what, about which decisions were made and why, about what the documents that remained classified actually contain, are not going to disappear because powerful people would prefer that they do. Those questions are going to be answered, or they are going to remain unanswered, and the answer to which of those futures actually arrives depends almost entirely on a small number of people in a small number of rooms being willing to do something that is much harder than it sounds, to sit across the table from institutional power, armed with the documents that institutional power would prefer remain unread, and refuse to be outmaneuvered by the language that power has spent years perfecting. And the difference between those two outcomes depends almost entirely on whether the people responsible for pursuing them are willing to do what Jasmine Crockett did in that hearing room. Show up with the documents, read them out loud, and refuse to accept it, not insert when the record shows what the answer actually is. Pam Bondi is a skilled attorney and an experienced public figure. She has navigated difficult situations before. She will navigate them again, but in that hearing room, on that morning, sitting across a table from a member of Congress who had done the work and brought the files and knew exactly what she was looking at, she could not defend the Epstein files. Not because she wasn't prepared, because the documents were more prepared than she was. That's the thing about records kept inside institutions. They survive the people who created them. They survive the decisions that were made to keep them quiet. They survive the political calculations and the legal maneuvers and the years of official silence. They sit in files, exactly as they were written, waiting for someone to find them and read them in public. Jasmine Crockett found them, she read them. And when the record is that clear, there is nowhere left to hide. So what do you think really happened in that moment? Did Jasmine Crockett expose something that wasn't meant to be seen? Or is there still more to the story behind those Epstein files? Let me know your take in the comments. I read all of them. And if you want more real breakdowns like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Capital Clash so you don't miss what comes next.